Okay guys, so we're going to talk about how to properly maintain one of these zero-turn mowers today. Now this one, if you look at it, it's an old eXmark. It's been kind of beat. First thing you'll need is fuel filter. You'll need spark plugs, oil filter over here, and then you'll need your engine oil. Okay, so on an eXmark, these are tucked away back here. This is your oil drain for your engine oil, and you'll crack that. I already actually drained the oil on this, and then right here, on most of these V-twins, you have an oil filter. And the easiest way to get that done is to grab it with a pair of pliers. And I always try to throw a couple of rags underneath of it because they drip, and then just undo it. Like so. And it'll drain a little bit, but you can see that needs to be changed. And when you do your oil filter, you're going to want to make sure that you have a little bit of oil around it, that the seal is wet. You're going to want to make sure it's not double gasketed. The gasket's on this one, so we're good to go. Otherwise it'll blow out all over. Then you just put it back on. Normally what I'll do is I'll give it a quarter turn. Just for kind of a little bit of safekeeping. And that's good. Now when you go to add it, some of these are tricky. But we'll need to add some more. We'll get to that right now. Okay, so when I add it, I'm a little bit lazy. I like to use a top with my quart bottle. And what I do is I just kind of get it down in there like so. That way I don't have to use a funnel and try to figure it out, because a lot of times these drain really slow. When you're checking it, what you're going to do is you're not going to thread this on. You're going to just set it there on the top. And you're going to let it sit for a minute, because obviously this drains down the same hole. And when you check it, what you're looking for is this thing to be level. And this one, if you look at it, where the fill line is, after Josh did this, it's actually pretty close to what it needs to be, but we're going to wipe it off now that we've let it sit for a second longer. We're going to do it one more time. And if you look, that is where it needs to be, almost. Because if you look right here, you can see where it's still a little bit dry. So we're going to want to add a little bit more here. And if you're wondering the oil I'm using, this is genuine Honda oil. Kawasaki's recommend the same thing. This one's actually a Kawasaki engine on this one. 1030 for our climate is really good. So we live in a 50 degree on average climate. Well, 50 to 60 I should say. But in Washington it doesn't really get hot here. So we're going to shove that in there again. We're going to look at this again. And we can see that now all areas of the dipstick are shiny. So we're going to run with that. And now we're going to do our spark plugs. There's one on each side. When you do these, you gap these at 30 thousandths. But they're pretty straightforward. What I like to do too, when I do my spark plugs, is this stuff right here is dielectric grease, and then this stuff right here is copper anti-seize. If you use the copper stuff, and I always start my spark plugs too by hand on one of these to make sure that I'm not cross-threading them. Because if you cross-thread one of these are a bear. They really are a bear to deal with. And the wrench I'm using is a universal spark plug wrench. I'm sure you could pick them up at Harbor Freight. This one right here is a snap-on. I do this professionally, so I don't have time to run down to Harbor Freight a lot of times to warranty something out. Then make sure when you put your cap back on, it clicks, just like so. And we're going to do the same to the other side here. And if you check with your manufacturer's recommendations, normally they'll tell you the gap that these are gapped at. Just go with that. I know some people say, oh, don't gap your spark plugs. Well, one of these ignition systems on these generates its own electricity with the flywheel and the coil. So gapping, if you don't get the right gap, you can actually have it go back into the module, into the primary side of the coil when it's running. If it's not gapped correctly or it's gapped incorrectly, you can actually fry the modules on these. And you don't want to do that because right now, with the current coronavirus situation, a lot of these parts are tough to get a hold of, but I'm just threading that in like so. And when I inspect one of these, now that I got my plugs changed, now I got to do my fuel filter, which is back here. And if you look, this one is kind of dirty. Like physically inside it's dirty. So when I do that, let me get the tripod here. I just grab a pair of these pliers. I'll shut my fuel off first. So you want to shut your fuel off. Then reach it up. Grab your spring clamp, slide it back. Sometimes you'll have to pull the fuel line off with your pliers. This one's kind of tough because it's been a while. We can change these out once a year in this company I work with. And you want to orient the fuel filter in the right direction. So this right here goes to the engine and it goes to the pump. So you want to make sure that the arrow on this thing, you can see the arrow, it goes in that direction. So the arrow faces towards the engine. That's also where the reservoir that catches all the dirt goes. And then same thing with the other side here. Now we got the fuel filter on. We'll pull this one down. Pull it off. Fuel filter goes in the trash. New filter goes on. You always want to slide your clamps up, and you want to inspect your clamps too to make sure that they're still actually springy. If they're not, what'll happen is it'll cause the fuel pump to draw air and not the fuel. And that's never a good situation, because what'll happen is as this thing draws air, it doesn't run correctly. And then before you forget, turn your fuel back on. And then put your fuel line back where it goes and orient it in the correct orientation. So now that we got all that done, we're going to check our last piece of fluid. That's going to be our reservoir tank. And on some of these you'll have a dot, some of these will actually have a dipstick. This one, you check it like this. This is, there's a hot side and then there's a cold side. And as long as it's between on the cold, you don't need to add fluid. These take a specific hydraulic fluid. The pumps, if you ever look in like the Hydro Gear book, which is what these are, they'll say just use AW40. eXmark at one time recommended, I think it was 15 weight 50, which I still have some of that. It's kind of tough to find. But the last thing you do on these is you're going to want to run around well, I've already got the nuts removed, but you're going to want to check the belt. And when you check the belt, you can see that this one is practically brand new, but you're going to be looking for rips or tears, or you're going to be looking for unevenness where it is. And then you're going to want to spin the pulleys and make sure they're smooth. And we already know these ones are. But the biggest failure points on some of these mowers is your idler pulleys, and if the bearing goes out in them, which they're known to do, but these all look good and they feel good. And then down below, you've got another belt, which is this one right here. And you're going to want to check the tension and make sure that it still moves, which it does. And then your grease fittings. This one's got a grease fitting right here. There's one of these on each side for the steering. You got one on the casters. You got one on the caster wheels inside here. And then on eXmarks, and like on many others, they've got one for the tensioner, and then they've got one up in here, which is kind of a tricky one to get to. And you'll just grease all these up on your zero turn. And one of the things I like to do is make sure that the belt's correctly tensioned. So when I do this, what I like to see is this has about 1/2 inch of slack in it if it's a manual one. And then I like to make sure too that this thing, you can pull it and it stays put. Because what happens, the way that this locks in place, is this moves from this point right here, this is your stop, to over here, and this is just slightly past. And if you look, it's angled. If this doesn't have belt tension, which you adjust it with this little turnbuckle right here, what you'll do is, this is a stop nut right here, and then you'll move that back, and then you'll tighten this. And as you can see, there's some wear marks on there from the wrench where I've already done that, but this one's tensioned correctly. And you'll want to look at your brake too right here and make sure that's still in okay shape and that's still in tension. Some of these overuse, they'll actually back off and they won't pull the thing off all the way, which is kind of why this one's burned up a little bit, because people don't pay attention. But other than that, that's pretty much the maintenance on one of these little zero turn guys. I could do another video on how to set the steering on them, and I can also do another video too on how to do the hydraulic service. But normally on hydraulic service, what you're looking for when you do one of these is the fluid to be clear. And if this filter isn't wet and the mower has less than 400 hours on it, which this one does, you don't normally change out that hydraulic filter, because that hydraulic filter is actually a bypass. So it doesn't actually positively flow fluid through it. What it does is it takes bypass oil from the reservoir and it filters it out over time. But that's about it. Hope you guys got something out of this.